dare. Sit on a stranger's lap and kiss him. The result? The mafia boss declared her his fiancée. The espresso machine hissed violently, a shrill sound that cut through the low hum of the coffee shop and settled deep in Lena Hart's throbbing temples. It was 10 minutes past closing time, and the rain was lashing against the plate glass windows of the daily grind, blurring the streetlights of Greyhaven into watery streaks of amber and gray. Lena wiped the counter with a rag that smelled faintly of sour milk, her movements mechanical. Every muscle in her body ached, a dull, rhythmic throb radiating from the soles of her feet up to her shoulders. She paused to push a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear, her eyes drifting to the stack of mail sitting next to the register. It was a small pile, but it felt heavy enough to crush her. The envelope on top was from the hospital billing department. Underneath that was a reminder about her student loans, and beneath that, a final notice for the rent on her cramped apartment. Her mother's medication costs had doubled in the last 3 months, eating away every spare dollar Lena managed to scrape together from double shifts and meager tips. Resilience was not a personality trait for Lena anymore. It was a survival mechanism, a tight coil in her chest that kept her standing upright when gravity tried to pull her down. She tossed the rag into the sanitation bucket and untied her apron, the knot giving way with a weary tug. The bell above the door chimed aggressively. Lena looked up, ready to tell the latecomer that the registers were closed, but the words died in her throat. Tessa stood there, shaking a wet umbrella onto the linoleum, grinning like she possessed a secret that could save the world. "You look like a ghost who just saw a tax audit," Tessa said, marching over to the counter. "I feel like one," Lena replied, her voice raspy from hours of taking orders. "We are closed. Tess, I have to count the drawer and catch the last bus." "You are not catching a bus," Tessa declared, leaning her elbows on the freshly cleaned counter. "And you are definitely not going home to stare at the ceiling and worry about things you cannot fix tonight. We are going out." Lena let out a short, incredulous laugh. "I have $12 in my checking account until Friday. I am not going anywhere." Tessa waved a hand dismissively. "It is my treat. It is my birthday week, remember? The girls are already waiting at the Violet Room. You need this." Lena: "When was the last time you did something that was not for work or your mom? When was the last time you just existed?" Lena looked at the hospital bill again. The guilt was instantaneous, but so was the exhaustion. She was 23 years old, and she felt 80. The idea of loud music and expensive drinks sounded terrible, yet the thought of sitting alone in her apartment, listening to the radiator clank while she calculated how many meals she could skip to pay the electric bill, sounded worse. 1 hour, Lena bargained, her resolve crumbling. 2, Tessa countered, and you have to actually drink. "No nursing a club soda for 60 minutes. 2 hours, Lena agreed, grabbing her coat. "But if I fall asleep in a booth, leave me there?" The Violet Room was an assault on the senses, entirely different from the stale warmth of the coffee shop. Here, the air smelled of expensive perfume, chilled vodka, and ozone. The bass from the speakers vibrated in the floorboards, traveling up through the soles of Lena's worn-out sneakers. It was a world of velvet ropes and dark corners, populated by men in suits that cost more than Lena's tuition and women who looked like they had been airbrushed into existence. Lena felt small. She tugged at the hem of her simple black dress, wishing she had something that did not look like it came from a thrift store rack. But Tessa and the others, Sarah and Chloe, were already pulling her toward a semicircular booth near the dance floor, shoving a cosmopolitan into her hand. "Drink," Sarah commanded, clinking her glass against Lena's. "To survival. To not crying in public," Lena muttered, taking a long sip. The alcohol hit her empty stomach hard, a sharp warmth that blurred the sharp edges of her anxiety. An hour passed in a haze of neon lights and shouting over the music. Lena found herself laughing. Actually laughing for the first time in weeks. The crushing weight of the bills receded to the back of her mind, dulled by 3 cocktails and the infectious energy of her friends. They were playing a drinking game, a loud, chaotic version of truth or dare that involved shouting secrets and taking shots. Okay, quiet down, Tessa shouted, slamming her empty glass on the low table. It is Lena's turn. Lena blinked, feeling the room tilt slightly. I picked truth. I have nothing to hide. Boring, Chloe yelled. You picked truth last time. Dare. You have to take a dare. Lena sighed, leaning back against the plush velvet seat. Fine, dare me. Make it something easy. Tessa's eyes glinted with mischief. She scanned the room, her gaze sweeping over the crowded dance floor, the bar, and finally settling on the elevated VIP section. The VIP area was a tiered platform cordoned off by thick velvet ropes and guarded by men who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast. I dare you, Tessa began, pointing a manicured finger toward the VIP booths, to walk up there, pick a stranger, sit on his lap, and kiss him. The table went silent for a second before Sarah and Chloe erupted in giggles. Lena choked on her drink. Absolutely not. No, that is insane. You said dare, Tessa insisted, leaning in. And not just a peck. Lena, you have to kiss him like you mean it, like you are dying for it. We are going to film it for posterity. I will get thrown out, Lena argued, her face flushing hot. I will get arrested. Look at you, Tessa said, her voice dropping, suddenly serious despite the alcohol. You are so terrified of everything, Lena. You are terrified of losing your job, terrified of the bills, terrified of living. Just for once, be reckless. Do something stupid. Be the main character in your own life for 5 minutes. The words stung because they were true. Lena looked at her friends, seeing the expectation in their eyes. The alcohol buzzed in her veins, whispering that nothing here was real, that consequences were for tomorrow morning. Fine, Lena said, standing up. Her legs felt unsteady, but she locked her knees. Watch me. She turned and looked at the VIP section. Most of the booths were filled with rowdy groups of corporate types or minor celebrities, loud and obnoxious. But one booth, set slightly apart in the shadows, was different. There was only one man sitting there. He was older than the college boys on the dance floor, perhaps in his early 30s. He wore a dark, tailored suit that swallowed the dim light. No tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. He was not looking at his phone or the dancers. He was watching the room with a stillness that was unnerving. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, sharp jaw, straight nose, and eyes that tracked movement with predatory precision. He looked dangerous. Not in the way a drunk at a bar was dangerous, but in the way a loaded weapon sitting on a table was dangerous. Quiet, lethal. Lena should have been terrified. Instead, she felt a strange magnetic pull. He was the eye of the storm. If she was going to do this, she wanted to do it with someone who looked like he could handle the weight of her desperation. She began to walk. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The journey across the club felt miles long. She slipped past the bouncers, who were distracted by an argument near the stairs, and stepped into the VIP area. The air up here was cooler, less suffocating. She approached his booth. The man did not look up until she was standing directly in front of him. When he did, Lena felt her breath hitch. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly cold. He did not look surprised to see a strange woman standing there. He looked like he was calculating the exact threat level she posed. Lena's courage faltered. This was a mistake. This man was not someone you played games with. But then she heard Tessa's whoop of encouragement from across the room. She saw the phone cameras raised. She thought of the hospital bills and the empty apartment and the sheer, suffocating boredom of her tragedy. She swallowed hard, stepped between his parted knees, and before she could talk herself out of it, she lowered herself onto his lap. He was solid. That was her first thought, beneath the expensive wool of his trousers. His thighs were rock hard. He did not flinch. He did not shove her away. He went perfectly still, his hands resting on the armrests of the leather booth. He smelled of oak, tobacco, and something distinctly metallic, like rain on cold iron. I am so sorry, Lena whispered, her voice trembling so much she barely heard it herself. It is a dare. I have to... She braced herself for him to call security. She braced herself for him to laugh or push her onto the floor. Instead, his hand moved. It came up to rest on her waist, his grip firm and warm through the thin fabric of her dress. His thumb pressed into her hip bone, grounding her. "If you are going to do it," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her chest, "do not half do it." The challenge in his tone snapped something inside her. It was not a lewd invitation. It was a command. He was daring her back. Lena took a shaky breath. She raised her hands and cupped his jaw. His skin was rough with 5 o'clock shadow, scratching her palms. She looked into those dark, intense eyes for 1 second, and then she closed her own. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It was supposed to be a performance. It was supposed to be a quick, embarrassing moment to satisfy a drunken dare, but the moment their lips touched, the script burned up. His lips were firm and unyielding at first, but as she pressed closer, he responded. His mouth moved against hers, slow and deliberate. It was not sloppy or rushed, it was masterful. A jolt of electricity arced down Lena's spine, making her toes curl in her sneakers. She made a small, soft sound in her throat, forgetting the camera, forgetting Tessa, forgetting the bills. Her fingers curled into the collar of his shirt, gripping the fabric tight. Adrian Moretti felt the woman on his lap tremble, but not with fear. He felt the heat radiating off her, the desperate energy she was pouring into the kiss. He had come here to wait for a meeting, to scan the perimeter for threats, to be the cold, unfeeling head of the Moretti crime family. He had not expected a girl with sad eyes and cheap shoes to walk into the lion's den and wake him up. He moved his hand from her hip to the small of her back, pressing her closer until there was no air left between them. The kiss deepened. He tasted the sweetness of cheap vodka and the salt of her skin. It was intoxicating. For a few seconds, the club blurred into background noise. There was only the heat of her body, the softness of her mouth, and the shocking realization that he did not want to let her go. Then, the air changed. It was a subtle shift, a vibration in the atmosphere that only someone who lived in a constant state of war would notice. The heavy thud of boots on the stairs, the silence cutting through the section near the entrance. Adrian broke the kiss, though he did not let her go. He kept one arm wrapped tightly around her waist, pinning her to him. Lena blinked, dazed, her lips swollen and red, her eyes unfocused. "What?" she whispered. Breathless, Adrian did not answer. His gaze shot over her shoulder, instantly hard and calculating. 3 men had entered the VIP section. They wore leather jackets and expressions of ugly entitlement. They were not security. They were Marco DeLuca's heavy hitters, the muscle for the rival family that had been inching into Moretti territory for months. One of them, a man with a jagged scar across his nose, spotted Adrian. He grinned, revealing yellowed teeth, and stepped forward, his hand drifting toward the inside of his jacket. "Well, look at this," the man sneered, his voice carrying over the music. "The king of Greyhaven, slumming it with the rats. We thought you were here for business. Moretti, looks like you were just here for a piece of—" Adrian's grip on Lena tightened, bruising in its intensity. He felt her stiffen as she finally noticed the men, her confusion turning to fear. He could not let her stand up. If she moved away from him now, she was just a bystander, a witness, collateral damage that DeLuca's men would happily hurt just to send a message. But if she was his, that changed the rules. Adrian cut the man off, his voice projecting with a deadly, calm authority that silenced the immediate area. "Watch your mouth," he said, his tone icy. "You are interrupting my night with my fiancé." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Lena froze. Her heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. She stared at Adrian, her eyes wide with shock. "Fiancé?" The man with the scar paused, his sneer faltering. He looked from Adrian to Lena, who was still perched on his lap, looking thoroughly ravished and close. The doubt crept into his eyes. Attacking a rival boss was one thing. Attacking a boss and his future wife in a public place with cameras everywhere was a declaration of total war that even DeLuca might not be ready for tonight. "Fiancé," the man muttered, exchanging a glance with his partners. "We did not hear you were shopping for a ring. Moretti, there is a lot you do not hear, Adrian said, his hand sliding protectively up Lena's back to cup her neck, his thumb resting against her pulse point. Now, unless you want to explain to Marco why you ruined a private moment, I suggest you walk away. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Lena barely breathed, terrified that if she moved, the violence hanging in the air would explode. She could feel the steady thud of Adrian's heart against her chest, slow and controlled. The scarred man spat on the floor, glaring at Adrian. This is not over. He signaled to the others, and they backed off, retreating into the crowd, though their eyes lingered on Lena with a menacing curiosity. Lena let out a shuddering breath, scrambling to get off Adrian's lap. He let her stand, but immediately stood up with her, his large body shielding her from the room. Across the club, she saw Tessa and the girls staring, their mouths gaping open. The phone they had been filming with was lowered, capturing the floor. They had heard. Everyone nearby had heard. I have to go, Lena stammered, her face burning with a mixture of humiliation and terror. She turned to flee, but Adrian's hand clamped around her upper arm. It was not aggressive, but it was inescapable. Do not run, he said quietly, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. Let me go, Lena hissed, pulling against his grip. You just told them I was your fiancée. You lied. I saved your life, Adrian corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. Those men work for people who do not leave witnesses. If you walk out of here alone right now, they will follow you. They will want to know who you are and why you were with me. Lena looked at the exit, then back at his face. The cold calculation was back in his eyes, but underneath it, she saw the same intensity that had fueled the kiss. My car is out back, Adrian stated, steering her toward the service exit before she could argue. You are coming with me. I do not know you, Lena cried, though she let him guide her, panic making her limbs heavy. You sat on my lap and kissed me, Adrian countered grimly, pushing open the heavy metal door to the alleyway. As far as everyone in that room is concerned, you know me very well. The cold night air hit Lena's flushed skin. A sleek black sedan idled at the curb, its windows tinted pitch black. A driver stepped out instantly to open the rear door. Adrian looked down at her. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his hair slightly mussed from where her hands had gripped him. For a second, the memory of the kiss flashed between them. The heat, the taste, the way their bodies had fit together. Get in the car, he said, softer this time. I am not going to hurt you, but I cannot let you walk away. You are on the board now. Lena looked at the dark alley, then at the open car door. She realized with a sinking feeling that the daring game was over. The reality was standing in front of her in a $3,000 suit, offering her safety in exchange for her freedom, torn between fear, suspicion, and the confusing, lingering burn of his lips on hers. Lena Hart ducked her head and climbed into the car. The interior of the sedan was a vacuum of silence and expensive leather, sealed off from the rain-slicked streets of Grey Haven. Lena Hart sat pressed against the door, her hands trembling in her lap, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. Every instinct she had screamed at her to open the door and tuck and roll, but the man sitting next to her made that impossible. Adrian Moretti sat with the relaxed posture of a predator who had already caught his prey. He was typing on a phone, the light from the screen illuminating the sharp planes of his face. He looked infuriatingly calm, considering he had just upended her entire life in the span of 20 minutes. Take me home, Lena said, her voice sounding thin in the quiet car. I want to go to my apartment. Now. Adrian did not look up from his phone. You cannot go home, he said, his tone flat and practical. Excuse me, Lena snapped, fear giving way to a spark of anger. You do not get to kidnap me just because of a stupid dare. I have a shift in the morning. I have a life. You had a life, Adrian corrected, finally locking his phone and sliding it into his jacket pocket. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes assessing her with chilling detachment. Now you have a target on your back. Marco DeLuca is not a man who forgives humiliation. You sat on my lap in his territory. You kissed me, and I claimed you as mine in front of his soldiers. I did not ask you to do that, Lena argued, her hands balling into fists. You would be dead if I had not, Adrian replied, or worse. DeLuca's men were filming. Lena, by now, your face is circulating through every back channel in the city. They are running facial recognition. They are checking public records. If I drop you off at your apartment, you will have company within the hour. And they will not be there to ask for a date. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was being dramatic, but she remembered the look in the eyes of the man with the scar at the club. It was a look of pure malice. So what happens now? She whispered. Now, Adrian said, looking out the window as the car began to ascend a steep, winding road. We managed the fallout. The car slowed as it approached a set of massive iron gates. They swung open silently, revealing a winding driveway lined with tall, imposing pines. At the top of the hill stood the Moretti estate. It was not just a house, it was a fortress masked as a mansion. Stone walls rose high into the night sky, illuminated by floodlights that left no shadows for intruders to hide in. As the car pulled up to the main entrance, Lena saw uniformed men standing at the perimeter, their postures rigid, weapons clearly visible at their waists. This was not just a wealthy businessman's home, this was a command center. The driver opened the door, and Lena stepped out into the crisp night air. She felt small, utterly dwarfed by the scale of the wealth and power on display. Servants in black and white uniforms waited by the double doors, bowing their heads slightly as Adrian approached. "Welcome home, sir," an older man said as he opened the door. Adrian nodded, walking past him without breaking stride. "Come with me." Lena, he did not grab her arm this time, but the command was clear. Lena followed him into a foyer that was larger than her entire apartment building. A crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting fractured light over the marble floors. Adrian led her down a hallway lined with oil paintings to a heavy oak door at the end. He pushed it open to reveal a library that smelled of old paper and scotch. 2 people were already waiting inside. One was a man about Adrian's age, with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow. He was leaning against a mahogany desk, cleaning his fingernails with a small knife. The other was a woman, sharp and elegant, wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than a car. She had a tablet in her hand and a look of fierce intelligence in her eyes. "Nico." "Rachel," Adrian said, walking to the drink cart and pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. "This is Lena Hart." The woman, Rachel, looked Lena up and down with a critical, appraising eye. "She's younger than I expected," Rachel noted, her voice crisp. "And she looks terrified." "I am terrified," Lena said, finding her voice, "and I want to know what is going on." Adrian handed Lena one of the glasses. "Drink. It will help." He moved behind the desk and sat down, suddenly looking every inch the crime boss he was rumored to be. "Rachel Vega is my attorney," Adrian explained. "Nico is my head of security. And you, Lena, are the solution to a very complicated problem." Rachel stepped forward, tapping her tablet. "Adrian has been negotiating a truce with the DeLuca family for 6 months. The city is bleeding, and it is bad for business. DeLuca is old school. He respects stability. He thinks Adrian is a loose cannon, volatile, violent, and unpredictable. Because I am." Adrian muttered into his glass. Rachel ignored him. "We needed a way to show DeLuca that Adrian is settling down, that he is looking toward the future, building a legacy, rather than just starting wars. A fiancé makes him appear grounded, vulnerable even. It makes DeLuca think Adrian has something to lose, which makes him feel safer at the negotiating table." Lena stared at them, the pieces clicking together in a horrifying puzzle. "So that is it? I am just a prop? A billboard to tell your enemies you are domesticated? It is a strategy," Adrian said calmly, "and it is a strategy that just became our only option. You are already involved. Lena, we cannot undo the lie, so we make it the truth." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "I am offering you a deal. You stay here, in this house, as my fiancé. We maintain the charade until the summit with the DeLuca family in 3 weeks. Once the treaty is signed, we stage a breakup. You walk away. And in return? Lena asked, her voice shaking with indignation. Protection, Adrian said, and compensation. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. Lena hesitated, then picked it up. The number written there made her breath catch in her throat. It was enough to pay off her student loans. It was enough to cover her mother's hospital bills for the next 2 years. It was enough to start over. Rachel spoke up softly. We know about your financial situation. Lena, we know about your mother's illness. This money ensures she gets the best care available. No more double shifts. No more worrying about eviction. Lena felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. It was not just anger. It was shame. They had dug into her life, exposed her desperation, and were now using it to buy her compliance. I am not for sale, Lena said, dropping the paper back onto the desk. I am not going to be your fake wife just so you can play gangster politics. She turned on her heel and marched toward the door. Lena. Wait, Adrian called out, but he did not stand up. She ignored him, grabbing the heavy brass handle and yanking the door open. She stormed down the hallway, her heart pounding. She needed to get out. She needed to breathe air that did not smell of money and danger. She found a side door near the kitchen and pushed through it, stepping out into a service courtyard. She scanned the area for a gate, a break in the wall, anything. Miss Hart. The voice was low and gravelly. Lena spun around. Nico was standing in the doorway, holding a tablet. He did not look aggressive, just resigned. You cannot leave, Nico said, not because we are keeping you, but because they are waiting for you. He held the tablet out to her. Lena hesitated, then looked at the screen. It was a live feed from a security camera. The angle was grainy, but the location was unmistakable. It was the entrance to her apartment building. A black SUV was parked across the street, idling. 2 men were standing on the sidewalk, smoking cigarettes and watching her front door. Lena recognized one of them from the club. They have been there for 20 minutes, Nico said gently. They are asking the neighbors about the girl who works at the coffee shop. They know your name. Lena. Lena stared at the screen, the fight draining out of her legs. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. She could not go home. She could not go to the police. Adrian owned half the city, and DeLuca owned the other half. She was trapped. She handed the tablet back to Nico, her hand trembling. Take me back to him, she whispered. When she returned to the office, Adrian was standing by the window, looking out at the dark grounds. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. I accept, Lena said, her voice hollow, but I have conditions. Adrian nodded once. Name them. No touching unless there are cameras or witnesses, Lena said, counting off on her fingers. I sleep in my own room. I have no part in your business. I do not want to know who you kill or what you steal. And the second this summit is over, I am gone. And I want the money in an escrow account controlled by me today. Adrian studied her for a long moment. He looked impressed, though he hid it well. Agreed, he said, but I have a condition as well. Lena crossed her arms. What? When we are in public, Adrian said, stepping closer to her, his voice dropping to a serious, heavy register. You cannot look like you hate me. You have to sell it. Lena, if DeLuca senses even a fraction of hesitation, if he thinks this is a lie, he will kill us both. You have to look like you are in love with me. I am a good actress, Lena said, lifting her chin defiantly. We will see, Adrian replied. The next 48 hours were a blur of humiliating transformation. Lena felt less like a person and more like a mannequin. A team of stylists descended on the guest suite Adrian had assigned to her, poking, prodding, and critiquing every inch of her. They dyed her hair a richer shade of mahogany, waxed her eyebrows into perfect arches, and tailored dresses to fit her frame like a second skin. On the night of the Greyhaven Arts Foundation Gala, Lena stood in front of a full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that left her back exposed. Diamond earrings, heavy and cold, dangled from her ears. She looked expensive. She looked like she belonged to Adrian Moretti. A knock came at the door, and Adrian entered. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his black tie crisp against the white shirt. He stopped when he saw her, a flicker of something raw passing through his eyes before he shut it down behind his mask of indifference. "You look adequate," he said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "You look like a criminal in a penguin suit," Lena shot back, turning away from the mirror. Adrian smirked, a small, genuine expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "The car is waiting. Tonight is the first test. DeLuca will be there." The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the city's museum. It was a sea of politicians, old money, and people who pretended not to know where Adrian's money came from. As they walked in, the room seemed to pivot toward them. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Adrian stayed glued to her side. His hand found the small of her back, his palm warm against her bare skin. It was a possessive touch, firm and constant. "Relax," he murmured, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. "You are stiff as a board. Smile, darling." "Do not call me that," Lena whispered back through gritted teeth, fixing a bright, fake smile on her face. "It is part of the job," Adrian replied, his breath sending a traitorous shiver down her spine. He guided her through the crowd, introducing her to senators and CEOs. Lena played her part, laughing at unfunny jokes and sipping champagne she was too nervous to swallow. But every time Adrian leaned in to whisper a name or a detail to her, the proximity scrambled her brain. He smelled of that same oak and steel cologne. His body was a wall of heat against hers. It felt confusingly intimate, this performance of affection. Then, the crowd parted. Marco DeLuca stood near the ice sculpture, holding a glass of red wine. He was an older man with silver hair and eyes that looked like dead sharks. He smiled when he saw them, a predator recognizing another predator. "Adrian," DeLuca said, spreading his arms, "and this must be the famous Fiancée." "Lena, this is Marco DeLuca," Adrian said, his voice level, though Lena felt the muscles in his arm tense under her hand. "A pleasure," Lena said, extending her hand. DeLuca took it, his grip slightly too tight. He looked her over, his gaze lingering in a way that made Lena feel dirty. "She is lovely." "Adrian," DeLuca drawled, "but she looks fragile. A strong wind might break her. Are you sure she is cut out for this life? It can be very dangerous for delicate things." It was a threat, thinly veiled and sharp as a razor. Adrian's jaw tightened. He released Lena's back and wrapped his arm fully around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. The movement was aggressive, a clear signal of ownership. "Lena is stronger than she looks. Marco," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "And she is under my protection. Anyone who tests her fragility answers to me." Adrian turned his head and pressed a kiss to Lena's temple. It was meant to look like a romantic reassurance, a gesture of love, but Lena felt the tension vibrating through him. His lips lingered against her skin for a second too long, soft and warm. DeLuca's smile faltered. He looked at Adrian's eyes, saw the promise of violence there, and nodded slowly. "Of course. No offense intended." "Congratulations to you both." As DeLuca walked away, Lena let out a breath she had been holding for 2 minutes. She was trembling. Adrian kept his arm around her, steering her toward the balcony doors. "You did good," he muttered. "You threatened him," Lena whispered, looking up at him. "You basically told him you would start a war." "He threatened you," Adrian corrected. The ride back to the mansion was silent, but the air was charged with unspoken electricity. When they finally walked into the foyer, the adrenaline that had been sustaining Lena crashed, leaving her exhausted and angry. She spun around to face Adrian as the staff retreated to give them privacy. "I cannot do this," she said, her voice rising. "Did you see his eyes? He wants to hurt me." "Adrian, you are using me as bait. I am using you as a shield," Adrian shouted back, his composure finally cracking. "Do you think I liked that? Do you think I enjoyed letting him look at you? You do not care about me." Lena yelled, stepping closer to him, poking him in the chest. "I am just a deal to you. I am just a fake fiancé to help you sign a contract. Is that what you think?" Adrian grabbed her hand to stop her from poking him, but he did not let go. He pulled her a step closer, their bodies inches apart. "Yes," Lena cried. "That is what you told me. You said the only reason I am here is because I was stupid enough to kiss you in that club." "You are wrong," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He stared down at her, his chest heaving. "It was not just strategy. Lena, do you know how many people look at me with fear or greed? When you walked across that club, you did not know who I was. You sat on my lap and you kissed me, and for 5 seconds, I was just a man. Not a boss, not a killer, just a man." Lena stared at him, stunned by the confession. His dark eyes were searching hers, raw and vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "It shook me," Adrian admitted, his gaze dropping to her lips. "It terrified me more than DeLuca ever could." The silence in the hallway was deafening. They were standing too close. Lena could feel the heat radiating from him. She remembered the kiss in the club, the way he had tasted, the way he had taken control. She saw his gaze flicker to her mouth, and her own breath hitched. She should pull away. She should scream at him, but her body betrayed her. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. Adrian's hand tightened on her fingers. He leaned down, his eyes half closing, the magnetic pull between them undeniable. For a heartbeat. They hovered on the precipice, the air crackling with a tension that had nothing to do with the contract and everything to do with the man and woman standing in the foyer. Then, Adrian flinched. He pulled back as if he had been burned, releasing her hand and stepping away. He ran a hand through his hair, his mask of control slamming back into place. "Go to bed, Lena," he said, his voice rough. "We have a meeting in the morning." He turned and walked toward his study without looking back, leaving Lena standing alone in the grand hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs, confused, terrified, and undeniably alive. The days at the Moretti estate bled into one another, a blur of gilded cages and suffocating luxury. Lena Hart had traded the frantic noise of the coffee shop and the constant dread of overdue bills for a silence that was just as heavy. The mansion was beautiful, undeniably so, with its marble floors that clicked under her heels and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Greyhaven. But it was a fortress, and she was the prisoner. Her routine was strictly regimented. Mornings began with a breakfast she did not cook, served by staff who averted their eyes. Mid-mornings were for online classes, her only tether to the life she had been dragged away from. Afternoons were consumed by the absurdity of her new reality, wedding planning. It was a farce. Of course. There would be no wedding. The date was set for a vague point in the future, safely after the summit with the DeLuca family, but the charade required props. Lena spent hours looking at floral arrangements, table settings, and invitation samples, pointing at random things just to make the wedding planner go away. She felt trapped. The security cameras in the hallways blinked with red, unsleeping eyes. The guards at the perimeter were constant reminders that outside these walls, people wanted to hurt her. Yet, in the quiet moments, Lena found herself gravitating toward the people who made the house run. She sat in the kitchen with the cook, Maria, peeling potatoes just to feel useful. She talked to Rachel Vega, Adrian's sharp-tongued lawyer, who stopped by almost daily to brief Adrian on the summit. One afternoon, they sat in the sunroom, Rachel tapping furiously on her tablet while Lena stared at a pile of fabric swatches. "He's not what you think he is," Rachel said suddenly, not looking up from her screen. Lena blinked, startled. "Who?" "Adrian. He's a crime boss. Rachel. He kidnaps people. He threatens people. I think I have a pretty clear picture. He's a man holding a wolf by the ears," Rachel corrected, finally setting the tablet down. "He never wanted this life." "Lena. His father was a violent, chaotic man. When he died, Adrian had two choices. He could walk away and let the organization crumble into a street war that would have burned this city to the ground, or he could step up, take control, and try to turn the ship around. He's doing a great job," Lena said dryly. "I am currently a hostage." Rachel offered a small, sad smile. "You are alive. In his father's time, you would not be." Adrian projects power because he has to. But underneath the suits and the icy stare, he's carrying a weight no one sees. Give him a chance. Lena, not as the boss, just as the man. That evening, the advice lingered in Lena's mind as she sat across from Adrian in the living room. It was time for their nightly rehearsal, to sell the lie of their engagement. They needed a backstory. They needed a shared history that could withstand the scrutiny of Marco DeLuca. "Tell me again how we met," Adrian said. He was sitting on the leather sofa, a glass of bourbon resting on his knee. His tie loosened. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper than usual. "We met at the library," Lena recited, bored. "I dropped a stack of books. You helped me pick them up. It was love at first sight." Adrian sighed, rubbing his temple. "That is terrible. It sounds like a bad movie. DeLuca knows I have not stepped foot in a public library in 10 years. Well, the truth is that I sat on your lap in a nightclub on a dare," Lena countered. "But apparently, we cannot use that one. We need something plausible," Adrian said. "Something that explains why I would break my own rules for you." "How about the truth?" Lena suggested, watching him carefully. "Not the club part, the other part. You saw someone who looked like she was drowning, and you decided to save her." Adrian went still. He looked at her, the amber liquid in his glass shifting as his hand tightened. "I did not save you, Lena," he said quietly. "I dragged you into the fire. You are protecting me," Lena said. "You are paying for my mother's treatment. You are frightening, Adrian, but you are not cruel. Rachel told me you never wanted this." Adrian looked away, staring into the fireplace. "Rachel talks too much. Did you?" Lena pressed. "Want this?" "No," Adrian admitted, his voice rough. "I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things, not break them. But when my father was killed, the power vacuum was instantaneous. If I'd not stepped up, the people who work for this family, the innocent ones, the drivers, the cooks, people like Nico, would have been slaughtered by men like DeLuca. I took the crown to stop the bleeding." He took a long sip of his drink, and for the first time, Lena saw the exhaustion that lived in his bones. He was not a king enjoying his throne. He was a sentry guarding a gate that was constantly under attack. "Come here," Adrian said softly, patting the cushion beside him. "We need to practice the physical cues. If we stand 3 feet apart at the summit, no one will believe we are engaged." Lena hesitated, then moved from the armchair to the sofa. She sat close to him, but not touching. "Closer," Adrian instructed. She shifted until her thigh brushed against his. The contact sent a jolt of awareness through her. Adrian turned toward her, draping his arm along the back of the sofa behind her head. It was a casual pose, but his body radiated heat. "Tell me a joke," he said. "What? Couples have inside jokes," he explained. "They laugh at things no one else understands. Make me laugh." "Lena, I am not funny," Lena protested. "Try," Lena thought for a moment, looking at his serious, expectant face. "Okay. Why did the Scarecrow win an award?" Adrian raised an eyebrow. "I do not know." "Why?" "Because he was outstanding in his field." Lena deadpanned. Adrian stared at her. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. A low, rumbling sound escaped his chest, a chuckle. It transformed his face, softening the hard angles and making him look years younger. "That was awful," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It made you laugh," Lena pointed out, smiling back involuntarily. "It did," Adrian conceded. He shifted his hand, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck. His touch was light, hesitant. "You have a nice smile. Lena, you should use it more often." The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. Lena looked at his mouth, remembering the taste of him from the club. The rehearsal was supposed to be fake, but the warmth spreading through her chest felt dangerously real. "I am going to bed," she said abruptly, standing up. Adrian's hand fell away, and the mask of the Mafia boss slid back into place, though his eyes followed her all the way to the stairs. 2 nights later, a storm rolled over Greyhaven. Thunder shook the foundations of the mansion, and rain lashed against the windows like gravel. Lena could not sleep. The wind sounded like screaming, and the shadows in her room felt too long, too deep. She pulled on a borrowed, oversized hoodie that hung to her mid-thighs and a pair of shorts, padding barefoot down the grand staircase to the kitchen. She needed water. She needed to ground herself. She pushed open the kitchen door and stopped. Adrian was there. He was sitting at the massive granite island, a single lamp illuminating a spread of blueprints and documents. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, his feet bare. A half-empty cup of espresso sat near his elbow. He looked up as she entered, his eyes scanning her attire before returning to her face. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "The storm," Lena said, walking over to the fridge. "It is loud. It is a bad one." Adrian agreed. "The power grid in this area is unreliable. We might lose the lights." Lena poured herself a glass of water and hesitated, then walked over to the island. She sat on one of the bar stools across from him, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping the hoodie tighter around herself. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Security schematics for the summit venue," Adrian said, rubbing his face with both hands. "DeLuca will try something. He always does. I need to make sure there are no blind spots. You look exhausted," Lena observed. "I am," Adrian said simply. They sat in silence for a moment. The only sound, the drumming of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. It felt intimate, domestic in a way that terrified Lena more than the guns and the guards. "Do you ever get scared?" Lena asked quietly. Not the adrenaline kind of scared, the deep kind, the kind that makes you feel like you are disappearing. Adrian looked at her, resting his forearms on the cool granite. "Yes, every day. I feel helpless," Lena confessed, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "My mother is in that hospital, and I am here. Her doctors call me with updates, and they use words I have to look up. I am paying for her treatments with your money, but I cannot hold her hand. I cannot fix it. I feel like I am failing her." Her voice cracked on the last word. Adrian's expression softened. He reached across the island, his hand covered hers where it rested on the counter. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, his thumb sweeping gently over her knuckles. "You are not failing her," he said firmly. "You sacrificed your freedom to ensure she lives. That is not failure. Lena, that is the bravest thing I have ever seen." "I just wish I could do more," Lena whispered, looking down at their joined hands. "I wish I could fix everything for you," Adrian said. His voice was low, a rough murmur that vibrated in the quiet kitchen. "I wish I could give you your life back, but I can't. All I can do is keep you safe." A crack of thunder exploded directly overhead, shaking the floor. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The kitchen was plunged into darkness, save for the dim, bluish glow of the emergency lights near the floor and the flashes of lightning illuminating the windows. Lena gasped, instinctively reaching out. Adrian was already moving. He stood up and came around the island, finding her in the dark. "I am here," he said, his voice right in front of her. "Stay still." His hands found her waist to steady her. Lena was still sitting on the stool, which put her face level with his. In the strobe light flashes of the storm, she saw the intensity in his eyes. He was close, inches away. She could feel the heat radiating from his chest, smell the scent of soap and rain on his skin. "Adrian," she breathed. He did not step back. He stepped closer, his legs bumping against her knees. One of his hands moved from her waist to her face, his fingers trailing along her jawline, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His thumb lingered on her cheekbone, tracing the curve of her skin. "We shouldn't," he whispered, but he did not move away. Lena's heart was hammering against her ribs, loud enough to drown out the storm. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "Why not?" she whispered back. "Because you are a job," Adrian said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Because I made a promise to keep you safe, and the most dangerous thing in this house is me." "I don't feel unsafe," Lena said. She reached out, her hands finding the back of his neck. His skin was hot. Her fingers curled into the short hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him down. Adrian let out a ragged breath, a sound of defeat and desire, and closed the distance. The kiss was nothing like the one in the club. That had been a performance, a challenge. This was a question and an answer. His lips were soft, searching, moving against hers with a slow, agonizing deliberation. He tasted of coffee and longing. Lena whimpered softly, opening her mouth to him. Adrian groaned, his control snapping. He stepped in between her knees, pressing his body against hers, pinning her to the edge of the counter. His arm wrapped around her waist, crushing her to him, while his other hand tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss. It turned heated, desperate. Lena's hands roamed over his shoulders, feeling the hard muscle beneath the thin t-shirt. Adrian's hand slid up her back, slipping underneath the oversized hoodie. His fingers brushed her bare skin, sending an electric shock through her entire body. She gasped into his mouth, arching her back, needing more friction, more contact. They were breathing each other's air, lost in the dark, frantic and consuming. For a moment, there was no DeLuca, no debt, no lie. There was just the man and the woman and the storm. Then, Adrian froze. His hand stopped moving on her back. He tore his mouth away from hers, his breathing ragged, his forehead resting against hers. His heart was pounding so hard Lena could feel it against her chest. "Stop," he rasped. "We have to stop." Lena blinked, dazed, her lips swollen and tingling. "Why?" Adrian pulled back, stumbling a step away from her. He ran a hand over his face, looking shattered. "Because you are technically a bargain," he said hoarsely. "You are here because you have to be, because you need the money. If I take this, if we do this, I am taking advantage of a desperate woman. I cannot cross a line I cannot uncross. Lena, not while you are under my roof as a hostage." Lena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the humidity of the storm. "It is not a bargain for me," she whispered. "Not right now. It has to be," Adrian said, his voice hardening, though his eyes were full of regret. "Go back to bed, Lena, before I forget my conscience again." The next day, the mansion felt different. The air was thick with things unsaid. They avoided each other until noon, when duty forced them together. They had an appointment at a high-end bakery downtown for a wedding cake tasting. It was a necessary photo opportunity. Rachel had tipped off the paparazzi. The bakery smelled of vanilla and spun sugar. Lena sat on a velvet stool, Adrian beside her. They were close, their knees touching, but neither acknowledged the electricity that arced between them at the contact. "Try this one," the baker said, presenting a plate of lemon chiffon. Adrian picked up a fork, cut a small piece, and held it to Lena's lips. It was for the cameras flashing outside the window. But as Lena opened her mouth and took the bite, her eyes locked with his. His gaze dropped to her lips, dark and hungry. "Is it good?" he asked, his voice lower than necessary. "It is sweet," Lena managed to say, swallowing hard. She took the fork from him and cut a piece for him. She held it up. Adrian leaned in, taking the bite directly from the fork, his lips brushing the metal, his eyes never leaving hers. It was an intimate, almost erotic act, performed in front of a smiling baker and a dozen camera lenses. "You have a little frosting," Adrian murmured. He reached out and brushed his thumb over the corner of her mouth, just like he had caressed her cheek in the dark kitchen. Lena stopped breathing. The line between performance and reality had vanished. She didn't know where the lie ended and the truth began. Her phone buzzed in her purse, shattering the moment. Lena pulled it out, frowning. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" "This is the nurse from Greyhaven General," a voice said. "Is this Lena Hart?" "Yes," Lena said, her stomach dropping. "Is it my mother? We have had a complication. The nurse said her vitals dropped an hour ago. We are stabilizing her, but her condition has downgraded to critical. You should come." The phone slipped from Lena's hand, clattering onto the table. "Lena?" Adrian's voice was sharp. "What is it?" "My mom," Lena choked out, the tears welling up instantly. "She is—" "I have to go. I have to go now." Adrian didn't hesitate. He didn't look at his watch. He didn't call a driver. He grabbed her hand, pulled her up, and threw a stack of cash onto the table. "Come on," he said. He drove the car himself. He drove fast, weaving through the city traffic with terrifying precision, but his hand never left hers. He held it tightly on the center console, an anchor in the middle of her panic. Lena stared out the window, silent tears streaming down her face. Adrian didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say it would be okay. He just drove, offering her his strength, his presence, a solid wall against the chaos. When they screeched to a halt in front of the hospital entrance, Adrian was out of the car before the engine died. He opened her door and helped her out, keeping his arm around her waist as they rushed toward the sliding doors. But before they could enter, a sleek silver car rolled slowly past the drop-off zone. Lena froze. The window of the car rolled down. Marco DeLuca sat in the back seat. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Lena, then at the hospital sign, and smiled. A cold, knowing smile. It was a message. I know where you are. I know who you love. I know where you are vulnerable. Lena stopped, her breath hitching in a sob of terror. She felt her reality collapsing. The fear for her mother, the confusing feelings for Adrian, the deadly threat hanging over them all. It was too much. She turned into Adrian, burying her face in his coat, her hands clutching his lapels. He is here, she sobbed. He knows. Adrian saw the car. His eyes went pitch black, devoid of humanity. He turned his back to the street, shielding Lena with his body, wrapping both arms around her shoulders to create a cocoon of safety. Look at me, he commanded, pulling back slightly to cup her face. Lena looked up, shaking. He can look, but he cannot touch, Adrian vowed, his voice fierce. I will burn this city to ash before I let him near her. Or you. Go inside. I will make the call to put guards on her floor. Go. Lena nodded, pulling away from him with difficulty. She ran into the hospital, looking back once to see Adrian Moretti standing on the curb, watching the silver car disappear into traffic, a man preparing for war. The atmosphere inside the Moretti estate had shifted from a fortress of solitude to a command center at war. The air was thick with tension, vibrating with the low hum of radios and the sharp click of weapons being checked and rechecked. Since the incident at the hospital, the illusion of safety had shattered. Adrian Moretti sat behind his desk, staring at a report Nico had just placed in front of him. The paper was thin, but the words typed on it carried the weight of a death sentence. Marco DeLuca had put a bounty out. It was not a contract for a hit, which would have been clean and direct. It was an information bounty, $50,000 to anyone in Greyhaven, waiter, valet, neighbor, or street kid, who could provide a schedule, a location, or a vulnerability regarding Lena Hart. Adrian rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the grit of exhaustion in his eyes. He had already tripled the security detail at the hospital. He had moved Lena's aunt to a safe house in the next state. He was burning through resources and favors at a rate that would bankrupt a lesser organization, all to close the net around one woman who had stumbled into his life on a dare. Upstairs. Lena paced the length of her room. She felt the shift in the house like a change in barometric pressure. She saw the new faces at the gates, the way the staff stopped talking when she entered a room. She felt heavy. Every guard posted at her mother's hospital room was a target painted on an innocent man's chest because of her. Every dollar Adrian spent on her safety was a debt she could never repay. She walked out into the hallway, needing to escape the suffocating silence of her suite. She headed toward the library, hoping to find a book to drown out her thoughts, but voices drifting from the open study door stopped her cold. It is a fantasy. Adrian, the voice belonged to Nico. It was loud, harsh, and stripped of the usual deference he showed his boss. Lena pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. It is not a fantasy, Adrian's voice shot back, lower but vibrating with intensity. We have the logistics. If the summit goes well, if DeLuca signs the truce, we pivot. We move the capital into clean real estate. We legitimize the shipping lines. We get out. You do not get out of this life, Nico argued, the sound of glass shattering against the fireplace punctuating his words. You are a Moretti. Your father died in a gutter so you could sit in this chair, and now you want to throw it away? For what? For peace? There is no peace for men like us. There could be, Adrian said. Is this about the girl? Nico asked. His tone dropped. becoming venomous. Because if this is about the barista, you're losing your mind. She has a soft spot, Adrian. And in our world, soft spots get people killed. She is not an asset. She is a liability. As long as she is here, DeLuca has a knife to your throat. Lena stopped breathing. She brought a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Hearing it out loud, liability, knife to your throat, solidified the cold knot of guilt in her stomach. She was not just a burden, she was the weakness that could destroy him. She turned and fled back to her room before they could catch her, the words echoing in her mind like a curse. 2 hours later, Lena stood in front of a mirror, fastening diamond earrings with trembling fingers. Tonight was another performance. A dinner with potential investors for Adrian's legitimate construction ventures. These were men who did not carry guns. Men who dealt in zoning permits and steel contracts. They were the bridge to the life Adrian wanted, the life Nico said was impossible. Adrian came to collect her. He looked impeccable in a charcoal suit, but the tension from the argument still radiated off him. He offered her his arm without a word. "You look beautiful," he said stiffly as they walked down the stairs. "You look tired," Lena replied, keeping her eyes forward. The dinner was held in the estate's formal dining room. The guests were a mix of city council members and wealthy developers. The conversation was polite, boring, and layered with subtext. Lena played her role perfectly. She smiled at the right moments, laughed softly at dry jokes, and kept her hand resting gently on Adrian's forearm. But beneath the table, her leg was bouncing with anxiety. She felt like a fraud. She felt like a target. Adrian's hand suddenly landed on her knee. His grip was firm, warm, and grounding. He squeezed gently, a silent command to breathe. He did not look at her. He continued discussing interest rates with a councilman, but his touch anchored her to the floor. "So, Miss Hart," one of the developers said, a man with a flushed face and a loud laugh, "I have to ask. My son showed me something on the internet the other day." "Are you the girl from that video at the Violet Room? The one with the dare?" The table went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Lena felt the blood rush to her face. She wanted to dissolve into the floor. That video, the moment of her greatest recklessness, was the only reason she was sitting here. It was a mark of shame, a reminder that she was just a girl who had made a mistake, not the poised fiancée of a powerful man. Lena started, her voice failing her. "Yes, she is," Adrian said. His voice cut through the silence, cool and sharp as a blade. He turned to look at the developer, his expression unreadable, and it was the bravest thing I have ever seen. The developer blinked, his smile faltering. Brave? It looked like a college prank. Adrian turned his head to look at Lena. He shifted his hand from her knee to take her hand on top of the table. He interlaced their fingers, locking them together in a display that was protective, almost possessive. "She walked into a room full of wolves without a weapon," Adrian said softly, his eyes holding hers. "She took a risk because she refused to be afraid. Most men I know would have run. She did not." He squeezed her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. "She's the bravest person I know," Adrian finished, turning his cold gaze back to the guest. "And I am lucky she chose me." The developer cleared his throat, looking suitably chastised. "Well, yes, of course. To bravery." He raised his glass. The tension broke, but Lena's heart did not slow down. She looked at Adrian, at the hard set of his jaw and the way he held her hand like he would never let go. For a moment, she forgot about the contract. She forgot about Nico's warning. She just felt safe. But the safety was an illusion, and the crash came as soon as the door closed behind the last guest. Adrian loosened his tie, heading for the liquor cabinet. That went well, considering. "Did it?" Lena asked, her voice shaking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind raw nerves and the memory of Nico's words. Adrian turned, glass in hand. "What is wrong? You were perfect tonight." "I am not perfect, Adrian," Lena snapped, the facade crumbling. "I am a liability." Adrian froze. "Who told you that?" "I heard you," Lena cried, stepping toward him. "I heard you fighting with Nico." "He is right, isn't he? I am a soft spot. I am the reason DeLuca thinks he can beat you. I am the reason you cannot get out. You should not have been listening, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a low warning. I live here, Lena shouted, throwing her hands up. I live in your house, surrounded by your guards, living off your money while my mother lies in a hospital bed with a target on her back because of me. I am not a fiancé. Adrian, I am a pawn. And I am tired of being moved around a board I do not understand. You are not a pawn, Adrian said, setting his glass down with a heavy thud. Then what am I? Lena demanded. Tell me. Because out there, you hold my hand and tell the world I am brave. You defend me. You look at me like I matter. But in here, we are business partners. We are a deal. Which one is the lie? Adrian, both. Neither, Adrian roared, his composure snapping. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, crowding her space. Lena backed up until her shoulders hit the wall of the foyer. Adrian did not stop until he was looming over her, his hands planted on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wild with a mixture of fury and exhaustion. You drive me insane, he rasped. Do you think I want this? Do you think I want to look over my shoulder every second of every day, wondering if today is the day DeLuca hurts you to get to me? Then let me go, Lena yelled back, tears springing to her eyes. I can't, Adrian shouted, his voice breaking. Why? Because I cannot breathe when you are not in the room, Adrian confessed, the words tearing out of his throat. The silence that followed was absolute. Lena stared up at him, her chest heaving. Adrian looked at her. His defenses shattered, his eyes searching hers with a desperate, hungry intensity. The anger in the air didn't dissipate. It transmuted. It turned into something hot and volatile. Lena looked at his mouth. She saw the conflict warring in his eyes, the restraint battling with the need. She made the choice for him. She reached out, grabbed the lapels of his jacket, and yanked him down. Adrian let out a growl, a sound of pure surrender, and crashed his mouth onto hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was searing. It was a collision of frustration and longing that had been building for weeks. Adrian's body pressed flush against hers, crushing the air from her lungs, his weight heavy and solid. His hands left the wall to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, angling her face to deepen the kiss. Lena moaned into his mouth, her hands sliding up his chest, clutching at his shirt. She felt starved. She felt like she had been holding her breath since that night at the club, and only now was she finally exhaling. Adrian swept her up, his arm hooking under her knees, lifting her effortlessly. Lena wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in the crook of his neck, kissing the pulse that hammered there. They stumbled toward the wide staircase, lips never separating. Adrian carried her up the stairs, moving blindly. Driven by instinct, he kicked open the door to his bedroom, the heavy wood slamming against the wall. He set her down near the foot of the bed, but he didn't step back. He followed her, his hands frantic. He fumbled with the zipper of her dress, his touch scorching through the silk. Lena tugged at his tie, throwing it to the floor, her fingers working on the buttons of his shirt. Every touch was a confession. I am scared. I am yours. I need this. They fell back onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and desperate kisses. Adrian hovered over her, his eyes black with desire, his chest heaving. He smoothed the hair back from her forehead, his touch suddenly tender, reverent. He leaned down, kissing the hollow of her throat, making Lena arch her back with a gasp. I want you, he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with need. I want you so much it hurts. He moved to kiss her lips again, his weight settling over her, promising oblivion. Lena reached for him, ready to give everything, ready to forget the danger and the deal. And then Adrian froze. He went rigid against her. His hand, which had been sliding up her thigh, stopped. He took a sharp, ragged breath and pushed himself up, bracing his arms on either side of her. He looked down at her. His hair was messy, his lips swollen, his shirt half open, but the fire in his eyes was being doused by a cold, brutal realization. No, he whispered. He scrambled off the bed, backing away from her as if she had pulled a knife. He stood in the middle of the room, chest heaving, running his hands through his hair. "We cannot do this," he said, his voice shaking. Lena sat up, clutching the bodice of her dress, confusion and hurt washing over her. "Why? Adrian, why?" "Because," Adrian said, turning to face her, his expression tortured. "If I sleep with you now." "It is not part of the deal. It is not pretend. It means you are mine. Permanently." "I want to be," Lena said, her voice small. "You don't know what you are asking for," Adrian yelled, the anger returning to mask his pain. "If you are mine, you are a target forever. There is no getting out. Lena, Nico is right, this life. It sticks to you. If I claim you, real claim you, I can never promise you safety. I can never promise you that you won't wake up one day and find me dead, or find a bomb under your car." He looked at her with devastating clarity. "I cannot do that to you. I cannot make you a widow before you are even a wife. I cannot ruin your life just because I want you." Lena stared at him, the rejection hitting her like a physical blow. She didn't hear his protection. She heard his refusal. She heard that she wasn't worth the risk. She heard that the deal was more important than the feeling. She stood up, her hands trembling as she fixed her dress. She felt cold, humiliated. "So that is it," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I am just a liability you have to manage. You can defend me in public. You can kiss me in the dark. But you cannot love me because it is too dangerous." "I am trying to save you," Adrian pleaded, stepping toward her. "You are not saving me," Lena whispered, backing away toward the door. "You are breaking me." She turned and ran. She ran out of his bedroom, down the hall, and into her own suite, slamming the door and locking it. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her hands. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't live in this half-world of almosts and lies. She couldn't stay in a house where the man she was falling in love with looked at her like a tragedy waiting to happen. She needed to breathe. She needed to be Lena Hart again, not the mafia boss's fake fiancé. She stood up and wiped her face. She moved with sudden, frantic purpose. She grabbed a small backpack from her closet. She packed only the essentials, her wallet, a change of clothes, her phone charger. She left the expensive dresses, the jewelry, the gifts. She sat at the desk and wrote a note. Her hand shook, but the words were clear. "I want my life back. Do not come for me." She left it on the pillow. She checked the time, 2 a.m, the shift change for the guards. She had watched them for weeks from her window. There was a 5-minute window where the delivery entrance for the kitchen supplies was left unmonitored, while the night crew signed off the logs. Lena pulled on dark jeans and a black hoodie, her own clothes, not the ones the stylist had bought. She slipped out of her room, moving like a ghost through the silent hallways. She avoided the main staircase, taking the servants' stairs down to the kitchen level. Her heart hammered in her throat as she reached the heavy metal delivery door. She pushed the bar. It clicked open. The night air hit her face, cold and wet with rain. She didn't look back. She slipped into the shadows of the alley, moving toward the city lights that twinkled in the distance like distant stars. She felt a surge of triumph mixed with terrifying loneliness. She was free, but she was not alone. Across the street, parked in the shadow of an oak tree, a nondescript gray sedan sat idling. Inside, a man lowered a pair of night vision binoculars. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over a contact named DeLuca. He typed a single sentence. "The bird has flown the coop. She is alone." He hit send, put the car in gear, and quietly pulled out onto the wet road, trailing the dark figure of Lena Hart as she disappeared into the city. The silence in Lena Hart's apartment was not peaceful. It was heavy, pressing against her eardrums like water. For the last 48 hours, she had laid on her lumpy mattress, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of a country that did not exist. The air smelled of stale dust and lemon cleaning spray, a sharp contrast to the oak and expensive leather scent of the Moretti estate. She had turned off her phone's location services the moment she stepped out of the alleyway 3 nights ago. She had gone a step further and removed the SIM card, burying it in a trash can 3 blocks away before buying a burner phone with cash at a convenience store. It felt like something a criminal would do. And in a way, She felt like one. She had stolen herself back. Lena rolled out of bed, her limbs feeling heavy. She had to go to work. The manager at the Daily Grind had been reluctant to take her back after her unexplained absence, but he was short-staffed and Lena was cheap labor. She pulled on her uniform. It felt tighter than before, or maybe she just felt different inside it. The coarse fabric scratched her skin. She walked to the window and peeked through the blinds. The street below was busy with the morning rush of Greyhaven. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried, and the city moved with an indifference that was almost comforting. She scanned the street, her eyes darting to the parked cars. There was a gray sedan parked across the street, near the hydrant. It was nondescript, dusty, and boring. She'd seen it yesterday, hadn't she? Or was it just a similar car? You are being paranoid, Lena whispered to herself. She forced herself to step away from the window. Adrian Moretti was a powerful man, but he was also a proud one. She had left him a note. She had rejected him. A man like that did not chase women who walked away. He replaced them. He was probably relieved she was gone, relieved he did not have to worry about the liability sleeping down the hall. The thought made her chest ache with a sharp, hollow pain, but she pushed it down. She grabbed her keys and walked out the door, locking the deadbolt with a defiant click. Across the city, the mood in the Moretti mansion was not relieved. It was apocalyptic. Adrian Moretti stood in the center of Lena's empty bedroom. The bed was made. The closet was full of the designer clothes he had bought her. The jewelry box on the vanity was untouched. The only thing missing was the girl. He held the note in his hand. The paper was crumpled from how tightly he had been gripping it for the last 2 days. I want my life back. Nico stood in the doorway, looking grim. He had never seen his boss like this. Adrian was not shouting. He was not throwing things. He was standing with a stillness that was far more terrifying than any tantrum. "We checked the bus stations," Nico reported, his voice low. "We checked the airport. She did not leave the city. She went home," Adrian said, his voice devoid of inflection. "She went back to that apartment with the broken lock and the thin walls. We have a team sweeping the neighborhood," Nico said. "We will bring her back." "No," Adrian snapped, turning around. His eyes were bloodshot, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. "You do not touch her. If she sees us, she runs again, and she is scared enough as it is." He walked past Nico, heading for the stairs. "DeLuca knows," Adrian said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He has been waiting for a breach. He has been waiting for me to leave a piece on the board unguarded." "We doubled the patrols around her building," Nico assured him, following him down the hall. "We have eyes on her. Adrian, she is safe. She is not safe." Adrian roared, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "She is alone in a city that wants to eat her alive because I painted a target on her back." He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, running a hand through his hair. "Find her," Adrian commanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Do not approach her. Do not scare her. Just watch her. If DeLuca's men even look in her direction, I want them buried." The shift at the coffee shop was a grueling return to reality. The steam from the espresso machine frizzed Lena's hair, and the customers were rude, impatient, and oblivious. 2 weeks ago, this had been her entire life. Now, it felt like a costume she was wearing. Every time the door chimed, Lena flinched, looking up expecting to see dark suits and cold eyes. But it was just college students and tired office workers. She took her break at 3 in the afternoon, sitting at a small table near the window. Tessa slid into the seat across from her, looking frantic. "You are alive," Tessa hissed, keeping her voice down. "Lena, I have been calling you for days. Your phone is dead. I thought you were in a ditch." "My phone is gone," Lena said, picking at a loose thread on her apron. "I had to get a new number." Tessa stared at her, then leaned in, her eyes wide. "So it is true. The rumors. You were actually shacked up with Adrian Moretti? I thought you were just—" "I do not know, staying at a hotel. But people are saying you were living at the estate. It was not what you think," Lena said, exhaustion seeping into her voice. "Was it romantic?" Tessa asked, breathless. "Lena, he is a billionaire. And a criminal." Sure, but mostly a billionaire. Did he buy you things? Lena looked at her friend. Tessa meant well. She saw the world through the lens of survival, where money was the only shield against misery. She could not understand that the golden cage was still a cage. He offered me money, Lena admitted quietly. A lot of it. Enough to pay off my loans and Mom's bills. Tessa's jaw dropped. And, where is it? Did you put it in savings? I left it, Lena said. Tessa looked like she was going to scream. You left it? Lena, are you insane? You are scrubbing tables for minimum wage. Why would you leave life-changing money on the table? Because I am not a prostitute. Tessa, Lena snapped, her voice rising before she controlled it. And I am not a charity case. He was paying me to be a prop. He was paying me to risk my life. He was paying you to be safe, Tessa argued. Look at you. You look like you have not slept in a week. You are terrified. Was it really so bad, being his fake fiancé? Lena looked out the window. She saw the gray sedan again. It had moved. It was now parked 2 spots closer to the shop. It was not the fake part that was the problem, Lena whispered. It was the part that started to feel real. She stood up, grabbing her empty mug. I have to get back to work. The sun had set by the time Lena finished closing duties. The rain had returned, turning the streets of Greyhaven into slick, reflecting mirrors of neon light. Lena pulled her hood up and stepped out the back door of the shop, intending to cut through the alley to the bus stop. She made it 10 steps before the hair on the back of her arms stood up. The silence in the alley was wrong. It was too heavy. Lena stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned around. A van was blocking the exit of the alley. It was not a delivery truck. It was a dark, windowless cargo van, the engine idling with a low, menacing rumble. Lena spun around to run back to the shop, but 2 men stepped out from behind the dumpster. They were not wearing masks. They did not need to. One of them was the man with the scar from the nightclub. Going somewhere, sweetheart, he asked, his voice grating like sandpaper. Lena opened her mouth to scream, but the second man moved with terrifying speed. He lunged forward, slamming a gloved hand over her mouth and wrapping an arm around her waist. Lena kicked and thrashed, her heels scraping against the wet pavement. But he was like a wall of granite. Don't, the man with the scar said, stepping closer. He held up a syringe. You make a noise, and you go to sleep. You stay quiet, and you just go for a ride. Lena froze, her eyes wide with terror. Good girl, the man said. He grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the van. They shoved her into the back. It was stripped bare, just metal walls and a few heavy tie-down straps. Lena scrambled backward, hitting the wall, gasping for air. Why are you doing this? She cried, her voice trembling. I left him. I'm not with him anymore. The man with the scar laughed as he climbed in, pulling the sliding door shut with a final, echoing slam. That is the best part, he said, looming over her in the dark. He thinks you are safe. He thinks you are gone. Which means when we send him the pieces of you, he is going to break. He leaned down, grabbing her chin and forcing her to look at him. You are not a person, darling. You are leverage, and you are going to start a war. Adrian was pouring a drink he did not intend to drink when his phone buzzed. It was a specific ringtone, one reserved for high-priority alerts. He assumed it was Nico with an update on Lena's location. He picked it up. It was not a call. It was a video message. The sender ID was blocked. Adrian felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He pressed play. The video was grainy, shot in low light. It showed a woman tied to a wooden chair in the center of a damp, concrete room. Her head was hanging down, her dark hair obscuring her face. Adrian's hand began to shake. The woman lifted her head. It was Lena. Her lip was split, a trickle of blood running down her chin. There was a dark bruise forming on her cheekbone. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terror that punched the air out of Adrian's lungs. The camera panned, and Marco DeLuca stepped into the frame. He was smiling, a relaxed, pleasant expression that made him look demonic. Hello. Adrian, DeLuca said to the camera, I found something of yours. It seems you were careless. You left your fiancé wandering the streets. DeLuca reached out and grabbed a handful of Lena's hair. Yanking her head back, Lena let out a cry of pain that tore through Adrian like a bullet. She is very pretty, DeLuca mused, and very spirited. She keeps telling us she isn't yours anymore, but we both know that isn't true, don't we? DeLuca leaned into the camera lens. Come to the old shipyards, Warehouse 4. Come alone. No guards, no police. Just you. If I see anyone else, I start cutting. You have 1 hour. The screen went black. Adrian stood frozen for a second, the silence in the office deafening. Then, he threw the glass of whiskey against the wall. It shattered, shards of crystal raining down on the carpet. He moved to his desk, unlocking the bottom drawer. He pulled out a heavy black handgun and a spare magazine. His movements were mechanical, precise, disconnected from the storm of rage and fear raging inside him. The door opened. Rachel walked in, her face pale. Nico showed me the file transfer. Adrian, you cannot go. I am going, Adrian said, checking the chamber of the gun. It is a trap, Rachel said, Melanie stepping in front of him. You know it is a trap. He wants you dead. Adrian, if you walk into that warehouse alone, you are not walking out. I don't care, Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. He has an army waiting for you, Rachel shouted. You are the head of this family. You have responsibilities. You cannot throw your life away for one girl. She is not just one girl, Adrian said, looking at Rachel. He holstered the gun and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a small silver USB drive. He held it up. Do you know what this is? Adrian asked. Rachel looked at the drive, confusion furrowing her brow. No, this is the insurance policy, Adrian said. Every bribe, every murder, every shipment, every crooked cop on the payroll. It has DeLuca's entire operation on it. And mine, Rachel's eyes widened in horror. Adrian, that is suicide. If you give that to the authorities... I know, Adrian interrupted. It brings the whole house down. It ends the Moretti family. It ends me. He slipped the drive back into his pocket. I am going to make a deal. Rachel, not with DeLuca, with the feds. I am going to give them DeLuca on a silver platter. And in exchange, I am going to get Lena out. You will go to prison for the rest of your life, Rachel whispered, or you will die tonight. Maybe, Adrian said. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame, but she will live, and that is the only thing that matters. The warehouse smelled of rust, diesel, and old blood. Lena sat bound to the chair, her wrists chafed raw from the zip ties. Her face throbbed where the man had struck her, but she refused to cry. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, using the pain to stay focused. DeLuca was pacing in front of her, holding a tablet. He was playing the video from the nightclub on a loop, the sound of the music and the crowd tinny and distorted in the large space. If you are going to do it, don't half do it. Adrian's voice from the recording echoed. Look at that, DeLuca mocked, pausing the video on the moment of the kiss. Romeo and Juliet. It is pathetic. Really, you ruined your life for a dare, girl. You sat on the wrong lap, and now you're going to bleed for it. Lena looked up at him, spitting a mouthful of bloody saliva onto the concrete floor. I did not ruin my life, she rasped. DeLuca raised an eyebrow. No? You are tied to a chair in a warehouse. You are about to watch your boyfriend die, and then you are going to be sold to the highest bidder. I would say that is pretty ruined. He's not coming, Lena said, her voice shaking but her chin held high. He knows it is a trap. He's smarter than you. He won't come. DeLuca laughed, a cold, barking sound. Oh, he is coming. Men like Adrian Moretti always come. They think they can save everyone. They think they are heroes. But there are no heroes in this city. Lena, just winners and corpses. One of the henchmen stepped forward from the shadows. He was holding a knife, testing the edge with his thumb. Boss, he is here. A car just pulled up. DeLuca smiled. His eyes lit up with anticipation. Check him, DeLuca ordered. If he is clean, let him in. If he has anyone with him, kill the girl. Lena felt a surge of terror so strong it made her dizzy. He came, despite the note, despite the rejection, despite the danger. He came for her. She squeezed her eyes shut, clinging to the memory of the kitchen in the storm, the way his hand had felt on her face, the way he had looked at her. not as a pawn, but as something precious. I wish I could fix everything for you. The heavy metal doors of the warehouse groaned open. The sound of rain hissed from the outside. Footsteps echoed on the concrete, slow, deliberate. Lena opened her eyes. Adrian walked into the light. He was alone. He wore his dark suit like armor, his face set in a mask of grim determination. He looked at DeLuca, then his gaze shifted to Lena. When their eyes locked, Lena saw the heartbreak there, but she also saw the love. It was not a performative look for a gala. It was real. "Let her go, Marco," Adrian said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I am here. You have what you want." DeLuca chuckled, signaling his men to surround Adrian. "I do," DeLuca agreed. "But why settle for just killing you, Adrian, when I can have so much fun watching you lose everything first?" Adrian did not flinch. He kept his hands visible, away from his jacket, but Lena saw the tension in his shoulders. She knew he was planning something. She knew he had walked into this hell with a plan to burn it down. And as he took a step closer, placing himself between the gun barrels and the woman he loved, Lena knew that Nico was wrong. She was not a liability. She was the reason Adrian Moretti was finally going to become the man he wanted to be. Part 6. The Greyhaven riverfront was a graveyard of industry, a sprawling skeleton of rusted cranes and hollowed-out shipping containers that loomed against the black sky. The rain had slowed to a miserable drizzle, slicking the cobblestones with an oily sheen that reflected the distant, indifferent lights of the city. Adrian Moretti walked alone. He moved with a steady, measured gait, his footsteps echoing in the silence between the crashing waves of the river and the hum of the distant highway. He knew there were eyes on him. He felt the weight of crosshairs on the back of his neck, the invisible pressure of snipers perched on the rusted catwalks above. Every step could be his last. Every breath of the cold, damp air could be the final one he took as a free man, or as a living one. But he did not falter. Fear was a distant, muted background noise. The only thing screaming in his mind was the image of Lena bound to that chair, bleeding because of a war she had never asked to fight. He reached the sliding metal doors of Warehouse 4. They were slightly ajar, a gaping maw of darkness waiting to swallow him. Adrian paused for a fraction of a second, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket. He felt the weight of the gun strapped to his side, and the lighter, sharper weight of the flash drive in his pocket. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was cavernous, smelling of wet rot and diesel fuel, high above. A few industrial lights buzzed and flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched across the concrete floor. In the center of the room, illuminated by a harsh spotlight, sat Lena. Adrian's heart slammed against his ribs. She looked small against the vastness of the empty warehouse. Her dark hair was matted to her forehead with sweat and blood. Her wrists were bound tightly to the arms of a wooden chair with thick plastic zip ties that bit into her skin. There was a bruise blooming across her cheekbone, dark and angry purple against her pale skin. Lena lifted her head as he entered. When their eyes locked, the air left the room. There were no words, but the conversation between them was deafening. In her eyes, he saw terror, yes, but he also saw a fierce, burning relief. And beneath that, an apology. "I am sorry I ran. I am sorry I made you come here." In his eyes, Lena saw the truth he had been too coward to speak in the safety of his bedroom. She saw the devastation of a man looking at the only thing in the world he was afraid to lose. "I am here. I have you." Her chest tightened, a physical ache that had nothing to do with her injuries. He looked shaken. The invincible armor of the Mafia Don was cracked. He looked like a man walking to his execution, and he was doing it for her. Well, look who decided to join the party. Marco DeLuca stepped out from the shadows behind Lena's chair. He was wearing a pristine beige trench coat that looked out of place in the filth of the warehouse. 6 of his men materialized from the darkness around the perimeter, their weapons raised and trained on Adrian's chest. "You are late," Adrian DeLuca drawled, resting a hand casually on Lena's shoulder. Lena flinched, pulling away from his touch. but her eyes never left Adrian. "I am here," Adrian said, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Let her go. Marco, this is between us." DeLuca laughed, the sound sharp and grating. "It is all connected. Adrian, you know that. You cannot separate the business from the pleasure. You tried to play house with a civilian, and now the bill is due." DeLuca snapped his fingers. One of his men stepped forward, holding a thick document and a pen. "First, the business," DeLuca said. "You are going to sign over the shipping routes. You are going to sign over the construction contracts. You are going to dismantle the Moretti legacy with a stroke of a pen." Adrian took the clipboard without looking at it. He signed the papers with a quick, jagged scrawl and tossed the clipboard to the floor. "Done," Adrian said. "Now let her go," DeLuca tutted, shaking his head. "Not so fast. I need insurance. I need to know that you are truly done. Adrian, I need to know that you are not going to come after me the second you walk out of here. I need to see you break." DeLuca pulled a heavy revolver from his coat pocket. He walked over to Adrian, stopping just outside of arm's reach. He held the gun out. "Handle first." "Prove it," DeLuca commanded. "Prove you are done with distractions. Prove you are loyal to the code and not some coffee shop girl who got lucky." He pointed a finger at Lena. "Kill her." The silence that descended on the warehouse was absolute. Lena stopped breathing. She stared at the gun in DeLuca's hand, then at Adrian. Adrian stared at the weapon. His face was a mask of conflict. His hand, usually so steady, trembled visibly as he reached out and took the gun. The metal was cold and heavy in his palm. "Do it," Adrian, DeLuca urged, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Put a bullet in her, and you walk out of here alive. You rebuild. You find another girl. But if you hesitate, my men will cut you both down where you stand." Adrian slowly raised the gun. He lifted his arm, the barrel wavering. He aimed it at Lena. Lena did not close her eyes. She looked at him, tears spilling over her lashes. She did not see a killer. She saw the man who had held her in the kitchen during the storm. She saw the man who had called her brave. She nodded. A tiny, imperceptible movement. "It is okay." Adrian's jaw tightened until the muscles jumped in his cheek. He took a deep breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then, with a speed that blurred in the dim light, he pivoted. He swung the gun 45 degrees to the right, aiming directly at Marco DeLuca's chest. "I am done!" Adrian roared, his voice thundering through the warehouse, "letting other men decide who lives and dies in my name." DeLuca's eyes went wide with shock. "You kidnapped an innocent woman." "Marco!" Adrian shouted, his finger squeezing the trigger. "And that breaks every code we ever had." Adrian fired. The gunshot was deafening. The bullet slammed into DeLuca's shoulder, spinning him around. Chaos exploded. DeLuca's men opened fire instantly. Bullets sparked against the concrete floor and pinged off the metal pillars. "Get down!" Adrian screamed, diving toward a stack of crates for cover. Lena threw herself sideways, chair and all, crashing to the dirty floor just as a bullet tore through the wood where her head had been a second ago. A sharp, stinging pain sliced across her upper arm as a ricochet grazed her skin. Before DeLuca's men could advance, the side doors of the warehouse burst open with a concussive boom. Nico came through the smoke, an assault rifle in his hands, but he was not alone. Behind him streamed a dozen men in tactical gear with FBI emblazoned on their vests. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," the voice boomed over a loudspeaker. It was mayhem. DeLuca's men, confused and outnumbered, tried to return fire, but the combined force of Nico's loyalists and the federal tactical team overwhelmed them. Adrian did not wait for the shooting to stop. He abandoned his cover, sprinting across the open floor toward Lena. "Adrian, no!" Lena screamed from the floor, watching bullets kick up dust around his feet. He didn't stop. He slid onto his knees beside her, shielding her body with his own broad back. He hunched over her, creating a human wall between her and the firefight. "I have you." He grunted, fumbling for the knife in his boot. "I have you, Lena." He slashed through the zip ties on her wrists. The moment her hands were free, Lena reached for him. She clung to his jacket, her fingers digging into his shoulders, burying her face in his chest. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the erratic, jackhammer beat of his heart against hers. "Are you hit?" Adrian demanded, gripping her face with both hands, his eyes frantically scanning her for wounds. "Just a scratch." Lena gasped, breathless. "You brought the police? You brought the FBI?" "I brought everyone," Adrian said, pulling her into his arms and holding her so tight it hurt. Across the room, Marco DeLuca was trying to crawl toward the exit, clutching his bleeding shoulder. 2 federal agents intercepted him, kicking his gun away and forcing him face down onto the concrete. "It is over!" Rachel Vega's voice cut through the noise. She stepped into the warehouse, flanked by 2 senior agents. She pointed at DeLuca. "Secure him. We have the evidence to put him away for 3 lifetimes." The gunfire ceased. The echo of violence faded, replaced by the shouting of orders and the clinking of handcuffs. Adrian slumped against the chair Lena had been tied to, pulling her into his lap right there on the dirty floor. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her sweat and fear. Shaking with the aftershocks of adrenaline, their breathing was ragged, synchronized, a desperate rhythm of survival. "I thought you were going to shoot me," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "Never," Adrian rasped, kissing the top of her head. "Not in a million years." Paramedics swarmed the scene 10 minutes later. They cut away the sleeve of Lena's shirt to bandage the graze on her arm. It was shallow, needing only stitches. Adrian refused medical attention for the cuts and bruises on his face. He stood by the ambulance doors, watching the agents load DeLuca into a van. Rachel walked over to him, her expression somber. "The deal is done." "Adrian," Rachel said quietly, "I handed over the drive. They have verified the contents. It is enough to take down DeLuca's entire network. And mine," Adrian added, looking at her. "And yours," Rachel confirmed. "They are ready to take you in for questioning. The immunity deal is on the table, but you have to go now." Adrian nodded. He turned to Lena. She was sitting on the back of the ambulance, a shock blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked exhausted, battered, but alive. He walked over to her. He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt on her cheek. He pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "I have to go," he whispered. "Where?" Lena asked, gripping his wrists. "To pay the bill," Adrian said. "I gave them everything. Lena, the business is gone. I am going to spend a long time answering questions to make sure DeLuca never sees the sun again." He pulled back to look her in the eyes. "You are free. Lena, the threat is gone. If you want to walk away, if you want to go back to your life and pretend none of this ever happened, I will let you go. No debts, no deals." Lena looked at him. She saw the bruising on his jaw, the blood on his shirt, and the utter vulnerability in his dark eyes. He was giving her the one thing he had fought to keep, her freedom. Adrian turned to walk toward the waiting federal agents. "Adrian," Lena called out. He stopped, looking back over his shoulder. "Do not dare me to wait for you," she said, her voice cracking, "because I do not half do things either." A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips. He nodded once, then stepped into the black SUV and was driven away. 8 months later, the room was sterile, painted a neutral beige that was meant to be calming but felt clinical. It was a visitation room in a secure federal facility. Lena sat at the metal table, her hands clasped tightly together. She wore a simple yellow sundress, a stark contrast to the gray surroundings. The door buzzed, and Adrian walked in. He looked different. The expensive Italian suits were gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and trousers. He had lost weight, the sharp angles of his face more pronounced, but he looked lighter. The crushing weight of the empire was gone from his shoulders. He looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man who had finally slept through the night. When he saw her, his steps faltered. His eyes shone with a sudden, fierce brightness. "Lena," he breathed, sitting down across from her. "You look good," Lena said, smiling, though her eyes were wet. "I look like a snitch in witness protection," Adrian joked dryly, reaching across the table. He stopped halfway, waiting. Lena reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm. They approved the final plea, Adrian said, his thumb rubbing her knuckles. Time served during the investigation, plus 5 years of probation and strict monitoring. I am stripped of all assets related to the organization. I am broke. Lena, I am used to broke. Lena laughed softly. I am good at broke. Adrian went quiet, his gaze intense. I need to tell you something, he said. Something I should have told you that night in the warehouse. What? That night at the club? At the Violet Room? Lena nodded. The dare. It was not just the dare, Adrian said softly. When you sat on my lap, when you kissed me, I did not know who you were. I did not know you were a student or a barista, but I knew that for the first time in 10 years. I wasn't thinking about shipments or hits or DeLuca. I was just thinking about you. He squeezed her hand. I fell for you before I even knew your name. Lena. I didn't make you my fiancée to fool DeLuca. I did it because I was terrified of letting you walk out that door and never seeing you again. Lena felt a tear slide down her cheek. You saved my life, Adrian, she whispered. You saved mine, he corrected. In the warehouse. When I had that gun in my hand, I chose you. I chose a life where I could look at myself in the mirror. I chose you over the power, and it was the easiest choice I ever made. He stood up. The guard by the door nodded, granting them a moment of privacy. Adrian walked around the table. Lena stood up to meet him. There was no audience this time. No cameras, no DeLuca, no lies. Adrian wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Lena's hands came up to trace the line of his jaw, feeling the familiar rough stubble. I love you, she whispered. I love you, Adrian replied, his voice rough with emotion. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was slow, tender, and shaking with the force of everything they had survived. It was a kiss of relief, of longing, and of promise. It tasted of a future that finally belonged to them. The morning air in Greyhaven was crisp, smelling of autumn leaves and roasting coffee beans. Lena flipped the sign on the door from closed to open. Above her head, the new sign swung gently in the breeze. The Second Chance Cafe. It was small, cozy, and located in a quiet neighborhood far from the neon lights of the nightclub district. Adrian was wiping down the counter. He wore a simple apron over a t-shirt. There was an ankle monitor on his leg, a bulky black reminder of his probation. But he moved with a lightness Lena had never seen before. He looked up as she walked in from the patio. Coffee is ready, he said, pouring 2 mugs. Lena smiled, taking one. She walked outside to the wooden bench that sat under the front window. She sat down, patting the space beside her. Adrian followed her out. He sat down, stretching his legs. We have 5 minutes before the morning rush, Lena said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Adrian hummed, wrapping an arm around her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside sat a simple silver band. It wasn't a diamond the size of a skating rink. It was modest, elegant, and real. Lena Hart, Adrian said softly. Lena looked at the ring, then up at him. Her heart did a familiar flutter. This time, Adrian said, taking her hand, when I ask you, it is not a strategy. It is not a lie born of danger. It is just a choice. My choice. Will you marry me? Lena laughed, a sound of pure joy that rang out in the quiet street. Tears pricked her eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Lena looked at him, a mischievous glint entering her eyes. She set her coffee mug down on the pavement. She stood up, then turned and sat sideways across his lap, just like she had that first night in the Violet Room. Adrian laughed, surprised, his arms instantly coming around her to hold her close. What are you doing? He asked, grinning. A dare, Lena whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. Oh yeah? What is the dare? Kiss me, she said, leaning in until their lips were inches apart. Like you mean it. Adrian smiled, the love in his eyes shining brighter than any city light. I always mean it. He closed the distance, kissing her under the morning sun, holding her close as the city of Greyhaven woke up around them. Their past was a story of danger and lies, but their future was unwritten, uncertain, and finally, beautifully, their own. Thank you so much for listening to the story. A dare sit on a stranger's lap and kiss him? The result? The mafia boss declared her his fiancée. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Lena and Adrian as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below and share your location. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the Mafia Romance Stories channel so you never miss a new episode. And don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in the comments section. Did Adrian make the right choice? Thank you for your support, and see you in the next story.